In the eye of infinity, beauty within scorn rose to power. An ancient symbol of archival fell from grace, the iris, collapsing its primordial abode, scorching past through many dying stars, through the realm of Hithafol, light years away, and bursting through the shadows of space from its abode. It set course to plummet on a doomed planetary system, the depths, created to be destroyed, trialed against their bubble of infinity. Its star, the great beyond, has died, and the vast barren plains were set to sink into the hollow void of space, clutched by an ominous overseer of this desolate coffin, a charcoal prince with ruby rings and scorching red eyes, tears trickling down to his fingers, beholds the now descended emblem. It recorded pasts and presents to become infinity's resource for the becoming untouched. Blasting across the blackness of infinity reigns two vigilantes from the same birthplace of the Iris, Father Tyrant and Lady Fate, both making conquest with the help of many lost and tortured souls walking these grounds. The Collapse, standing 25 feet tall, jagged and morbid darkness shrouds their nervous systems, seemingly born from their realm on the other side, Yondrathal. Atop the mountain, Tyrant and Fate climbed before meeting face to face with the Charcoal Prince himself, Vysen Pavavore, surrounded by several distinguishable collapses sporting protective armory. A brave fight was fought. The blood lay waste to the castle walls, and there lay the bitter and punished prince. Before he is banished to the nothingness known as the Damned, a lightless and blank stare through Vegala's bubble, Vysen heeds a warning of beast rising once again, feeding off the light that will soon be reborn. He is henceforth denied his ground and thrown away to the Damned, not to be heard of again. Tyrant made a solemn vow to restore the great beyond, harness the Iris's full potential, and protect the depths from further peril. Centuries pass, societies were born, and 1,000 years of peace befell. The Collapsed would soon become the Onyx Colony, sported with armor and weaponry forged from Purgaprime Castle, and harnessing arcane-like power. They are sent to the borderline to draw energy from their beloved star, which in turn was harnessed to control their next hosts on the other side of Hithafol's realm, on their connected planet called Nadoria. But 1,000 years later, the foreboded myth became a reality. Dark matter of sentience swooped from the rip in space. Paradigm worms came to suck the life dry from the depths to grow stronger, become many beasts in unison before becoming its ultimate form, the Motho Hive. An abomination colonized of these paradigm worms in their fullest form, it became an unfathomable threat to all. Tyrant and Fate escorted several Onyx Colony soldiers accompanied by their elites to battle this new threat to their world. Many were hoarded off from the Bipolesian, Anxosax, and Claustronoctus to be met with the dreaded Grief Worm before coming face to face with the dominant Titan swarming these soldiers of war. It was simply too powerful, undefeatable. The Motho Hive thwarts the army with might and tenacity. Alas, they had fallen. They were banished to the Damned, where the all-too-familiar Charcoal Prince would once again find themselves alongside Tyrant. It seemed the myth was true, and all, especially the Damned, were terrified. A deal was made to revive the army in hopes of combating this unholy monstrosity again. But a condition was made. When the mightiest falls, Tyrant and Fate's firstborn, is to be banished to the damned immediately, with no compromise. Fates were sealed, and hands were shaken. The talisman bestowed to Tyrant reignites the flame inside our now risen army, prepared to fight again. The Motho Hive shows no mercy as it slashes their king and queen, drawing blood. Fatal wounds were drawn, but what became of this was to make the grandest legend entail. The fusion of Vegalian blood with dark matter created surrogacy for an egg that would be hatched, landing atop the crimson mountains they walked upon. The Motho Hive was weakened, and the soldiers gathered the remains to be locked away in a stronghold prison called the Encrypt. The egg was taken by Tyrant and Fate as they wait for it to hatch. And so, this journey's behemoth legend ascended from the egg. It was written, the Goliath was born, an amalgamation of Vegalian anatomy forged by skin of dark matter, beholding the strongest bone structure known to mankind. Goliath spent the rest of his years finding his place, being taught melee combat, growing his strength until he became too much for the colony. He simply could not fit in with a kind that differed from his own. Perceived as a monster. 1,000 years pass since his birth, and the depths once again reaches the edge of their galaxy's entire bubble. A wormhole opened from the damned, reigning in dozens of gargoyle spirits in all shapes and sizes, sworn to proclaim all with their first invasion. The Havoc Soldiers descended down on the depths to swallow it whole and destroy every living spirit. They, however, were no match for their greatest hero, Goliath, who fought valiantly against all odds, banishing the Havoc Soldiers back to where they came from. They did not come without sacrifice, and a graveyard was erected to honor the fallen. Their spirits still have so much trapped. They could not make it past their land without a fulfilled purpose. Goliath stands to mourn for the fallen soldiers. Approaching from behind, Father Tyrant walks towards his firstborn with a dire purpose for him: to keep guard of the Encrypt for an eternity, and to protect the land from anything ever emerging from the gargantuan tomb. This does not best please Goliath, as this will mean he may never properly have a connection with his family ever again. Goliath pleads for reason, his pleas falling on deaf ears as he is warned there is much more to learn about the struggle that befell this world. Tyrant harnessed the power of the Iris's all-knowing archival, strikes his hand down on Goliath's head, and sends him through a journey of memories untold. This is the story of those memories. The creation of infinity started with a monstrous bang. Behold, Vegala Infinity. A rip flushed through the fabrics of space so large it forged two realms, Hitherfall and Yondrathal. The center of it all, born deities among gods, Hithistrust, Yondrath and Wonderamite. Hither and yonder, be ready for wonder. For millions of years, the deities of Vegala Infinity created planets among their systems, watching them die and learn from their graves, witnessing societies clash, digital races devolving, and nature crumbling. There stood tall in their hospice a grand spectacle of archival called the Iris, forged from the remnants of Vegalian aftershock and the spirit of all deities. It sealed every planet's past and present, bolstering a brighter and longer future for each system. Beyond their bubble were horrors beyond comprehension, looking to make connection with Vegala infinity. It is this secret they must bear for themselves, to be kept from their people forever. Among the Vegalian citizens, there were specially chosen gods to oversee the new planet's awakening. The messengers of Vegala must rule over their new system's realm until the day it dies. They weren't there to protect and save worlds. They were there to merely watch its example. The deities created Vegala Zero, a smaller, singular planetary system connected to a star at the very edge of their infinity. What happens when the world is close to the bubble of infinity? Does it die to the shadow that would encompass it, or become resilient against it? No answer was clear until finding out. MR.FrownOfficial called upon its colony for a chosen god to oversee the depth's turmoil. As many held their hands high, one stood tall. It was the charcoal prince himself, Vysen Pavavori. They geared his arsenal and whisked him away to Vegala Zero on his mission, not to be seen until the task is done. Disbelief filled the air at what a dangerous existence this was, of which one stood against the deities. One long-haired, bearded, bold, and well-kept Father Tyrant rose to his feet and dared to question MR.FrownOfficial and the deities alongside their stead. This angered the Almighty, and swiftly cast Tyrant away to confinement, trapped inside a bolted and rotten cage to live his days until his punishment was complete. Claustrophobic, carnal, and a burdening reminder of the cries for help he wept for. Numb and pale, he would almost be lifted with offerings of help, but alas, was tormented throughout the peril and suffering. His hope numbing forever, all for daring to ponder if he will ever escape this horrific confinement. For once, time did not seem to heal wounds. It only created them. Long since Tyrant had been banished to imprisonment for opposing the deity's decision. He was let free on a pardoning deal. But while freedom was granted to the body, the soul was not inclined to follow suit. Father Tyrant lay desolate in his abode, slumped in a slough of pain and misery from within. His probation period had begun and was tied to his colony for what many would consider a millennia, a cruel punishment from the deities, but for what they feel is a just scolding. However, while Tyrant occupied his time inside, he only learned to bottle his emotions. Who was there to talk? Who was around to bring sense? Nothing but a cold and gloomy attic filled to the brim with glowing lights of academic resource, known as Vegala orbs. These orbs hold knowledge from the ages, tailored as a resource for study and gifted to respected colonies by the deities to grow smarter and become stronger of will and mind. But the more he possessed Vegala, the more despair he feels. It boils inside. Has the knowledge he's learned been corrupt in puddles of deceit? Perhaps. Did they lie to their people? These questions bring Tyrant to his feet, standing tall as he grabs hold of his chest, Vegala orbs catapulting to the walls. A ferocious roar emits from the monster inside that was trapped. It needed to be free. Tyrant has had enough. It was time to draw the line. This feeling locked in tattered spirits. Has such a turmoil ever been felt before? Overt awareness to the galaxy became the forefront of Tyrant, like he could see every single deception, and all it took was being scorned by powers above his own. He knew this could not last. The people needed to know the truth. He grabs his cloak and marches out of his recluse. He belonged to the Crimson Colony, among several more. These tribes are beholders of great power, to which their existence rests on one day becoming a god, taking charge of a new birth planet after the last was to perish. It was on this day of Vegala infinity the people were to be told of unspoken gospels hailed from new perspectives. But alas, while Tyrant's prestige and strong will kept grounded and persistent, it would appear his words fell on deaf ears. The Crimson Colony would howl and chortle at his heated warnings. Laughter filled and erupted as it surrounded Tyrant, drowning him in a roaring sea of tragedy. The tribe was not ready to hear his truth, and with his failed attempt, he drags his heels back home, locking himself inside. He had kept his bravado intact throughout the tribe for as long as he'd truly lived. And his one and only chance to put down the veil once the show begins was met with shame. Failure filled his mind. Scars opening and a deep bludgeoning of anxiety pierces his heart. His lights went out, and thus he slumbers. Time was nothing to Vegala Infinity. Being strapped to the center of a galaxy brings with it an oscillated existence. Being responsible for time itself holds you to no time but the core. Timeless as it may be, Tyrant's abode felt like centuries. Woe, dismay, fatigued with guilt not his own to bear. The blockade of failure flooding inside, anxiety is the timekeeper, and it doesn't carry weight for anyone. A house made of glass, and unwilling to cast the first stone, Tyrant can only watch on as the outside world casts their own. Days, months, perhaps years would pass before gazing upon a common theme. He would pay a smidge more attention to those walking past his sarcophagus and notice a group of Velveta vanguards strolling by, yet another of the many tribes that exist throughout the lands. A stark contrast between the desolation of Tyrant's plateau of a disarray and the ever so cheerful group. But falling behind was one Velvetan Vergalian that stood out above the others. It appears Tyrant may not be the only tragedy succumbed to mental confinement. It all seemed too good to be true, but it was too soon to act now. He would lay waiting, looking outside of his window, each day to see if the same pattern would repeat. And to his amazement, such fate would come to pass. This mysterious soul would fall further and further back as the others would giggle among themselves. It was at this point in time that Tyrant knew for once in his miserable life he wasn't alone. No more beholden to the cavalcade of self-destruction that bound him. It was time to learn more about this miracle. However, it had dawned upon him gifts weren't often given, only earned. Could it be that the deities gave him pity and mercy? It all seemed too good to be true, but if one could rise from gutter to glory, perhaps being a king did not matter anymore. The dream to become a god no longer resided in the deity's own choosing. Destiny was not bound by their choosing anymore. This time, Tyrant was about to become his own king, on the hunt for his own queen. Locked and loaded, body on the verge of complete revolution. Tyrant became thirsty for an exit from his colony of crimson. Such a task would not be easy. It would take cunning and stealth to break the barrier beyond his own. He had concocted a mineral called Ripple Tide. It would take precise and extreme medical practice. Yet time inside his self-made hospice gave Tyrant enough time to learn from his discography of Vigil orbs. This particular capsule reverse engineers a Vegalian's sarcophagi, which alters one's outer shell to the colors surrounding them. Particularly, this camouflages them, becoming invisible to the naked eye. This was essential for Tyrant to make a swift and painless escape from the colony. Slowly working his way towards the exit, not a single soul beholding his presence. However, to Tyrant's surprise, one more crept step through the gates. They locked down behind him. A siren is triggered, and Vegala is now aware of an escapee. Anxiety and caution fills Tyrant's lungs, which triggers something within his genetic code. Flipping in and out of visibility, his anxiety attacks are causing each atom in his body to destabilize. They've got him cornered, and in a last-ditch attempt, threw arsenals of crimson weaponry towards the citizens of Vegala, in the form of smoke grenades that slow civilians' motor systems down, locking them into slow motion. On a high-octane chase with seemingly no end in sight, Tyrant is able to evade line of sight, hiding behind a strange form of shrubbery called a brintulia. They are healing plants. Any inhalation of the fumes will send you through floods of relaxation. It also removes harsh and unnatural chemicals from the body. This returns Tyrant to normal, but after wafting enough of the sweet nectar caused him to grow more unconscious, until he fades to black. The things a man will do for the things he craves most, he would put his life on the line, so he can live to see her one last time. He wakes in a strange room full of brintulia, and a mist of lavender like hue shrouds him. He is no longer home, and his vision still remains clouded. As calm as he felt, uncertainty and discomfort still fills his body. He internalizes the pain and questions if he is supposed to feel like this. Like a phantom anxiety with no cause. A whisper is heard in his ear, which brings him to attention. He turns to a strange figure on his left who stares down at him, with his hand held onto his forehead. Suddenly, Tyrant is able to regain consciousness and discovers it was the woman he needed. At long last, he smiles. A tear sheds from his eye. He has found what he was looking for. She greets herself as Lady Fate, next in line to the Velveta colony's hopeful new god to adventure through the Vegala system. She was a protector, rather delicate for her kind, but their whimsical science was unlike the Crimson Colony. They specialized in defenses built for planets much weaker than ours. It turns out Lady Fate was but thrilled to hear there was a rebellion forming against the deities, which surprised Tyrant. Surely, it can't be so easy to be persuaded. The Velveta colony are known for their stoic shells, but he was love-stricken nonetheless. This was a feeling unfelt for what seemed like a lifetime. They decide to form an alliance together and plan to crumble the deities down. One common goal: infiltrate their kingdom's castle walls, storm the brigade, and enter the palace's most treasured and tight-locked fortitude, holding the legendary emblem of archival, the iris. What else are the deities hiding? How many lies have they given to their own people? All felt so lost, but soon was to be found once again. Days and nights passed through Hithafol, A dusk emits through the lands. Vegala Infinity's palace has access to the core of all ground, the Cradle Primus. Bigger than planets, magma-heated electrolytes fill around the gravitational pull that creates a ball of thunderous chaos. Only manipulatable by its creator, the deities can dim its properties on demand. Soon, Vegala turns dark, and thus all who reside in turn slumber. All aside from the forging of a new dynamic duo, Tyrant and Fate charge toward the castle gates and find their own way through tight corners and steep ascents above the palace walls. They would both carve together a tool of crimson and Velveta properties that would protect them from the invisible wireframes that could trigger an alarm. Tension courses through thicker than blood. But something was still bothering Tyrant. He had questioned Fate, how she could possibly know about what keeps the castle secure. Each colony was forbidden to know such knowledge, but somehow Fate knew more than she should. She gathers enough time to explain. They stand still, and before she can open the truth, suddenly, words become shrieks, as a titanic crash brings the main doors down. There behold their gravest nightmare, Pithistras, Yundoth Atticus, and Wandramite, the three almighty deities. They quickly grab the two unprepared vigilantes and throw them into airtight cages. They are levitated towards the brute and might of the Vegalian emperors. Fate would accidentally reveal a despicable knowledge of internal betrayal. She would question why she was locked up, which should have been more than obvious. That was until the deities revealed a crucial twist. She was working with them all along to take down Tyrant from the inside. Shaken, torn, agonizing pain shrieks from Tyrant in violent volumes through the walls. He had been betrayed. But to the surprise of Fate, she would too be punished for her cooperation. She too was deceived, all while being used as a mere pawn against Tyrant. His fears were all but validated. Fate was not originally an adversary. She was far too dangerous. Though locked in tombs once lived by the carcasses of previous Vegalian traitors, their demise was far from over. The entire of Vegala Infinity was called to alarms and distresses. It was the chime of the emperors. They would talk among the lessers, and with them the two cages containing Tyrant and Fate. All present were beholden to the powers above them, as they would proclaim of the traitors not once but twice, trying to smite not only their own colony, but all of Vegalian kind. Before the gauntlet of punishment was to begin, however, the traitors were given one last chance to plead their words to those they turned their backs on. They would both quiver uncontrollably before laying their reasons on the ground. They would tell the people that they had been lied to by the deities, that there were many more truths to these lands. Planets have died and revived, and a new planet was created to simply be executed. They had felt Vegala needed to know before laying down their undeniable allegiance to whom they have shrined for so very long. This brings the citizens to a haunting silence as they look upon one another. But before they could think too long, the deities chuckled, chortled, erupted into a roar of laughter. They would speak to their people that Tyrant and Fate are about to be the cause of a deadly awakening to the innocent citizens of Vegala. They beckon that as easy as something is to give, something can be taken away. and it would be at the fault of the betrayers for what would happen next. It is with this that Hithistras, Yondarth Atticus, and Wanderamite raise their hands. Demonic and deadly waves of energy forged into destructive fireballs. And just like that, they take aim at their land's sacred castle that contained their holiest Bible of knowledge. It was a sanctuary for all of Vegala to feel safety and comfort, to unite one another in a noble cause, holding the Vegalian Bible, which kept people protected, keeping a community of warriors alive and connected as one. But while their connection was strong, it is in this horrific and ghastly day of carnage, their unity was about to be tested. The fireballs crash into the castle. Foundations and bricks crumble to the ground. Flames surrounding the city. Vegalian people crying in agony as their beloved shrine falls into ashes and dust. Their castle had been destroyed. Ashes to ashes, this once proud temple of hope and prosperity became a desolate grave. The deities had let Tyrant and Fate out of their cages to be used as hunted prey. But the people of Vegala were too horrified, weakened by the lustful vengeance from power-hungry emperors. All they could do was sit and cradle one another. Families huddling up to be shoulders to cry on. Vegala weeps. But as one tear falls, so does the weight of what it carried. Tyrant stood with his people and chanted a harrowing and powerful speech before those brought to their knees.
Do you see, finally? Have your eyes brung themselves to attention? Look at what they did to our shrine. Our people, beaten down and annihilated by who we're supposed to glorify. They have greater power to take more away from us, so long as we step out of line. Whose line is it to own? What order does this bring? It only tells us we were itemized and tied to the inanimate. But look inward. Look towards your others. There are no lessers here. We don't see lesser. When we stop staring at the castle that bound us, you realize we were the castle. And this is one castle that will never die. We can rebuild. We can repopulate just as quick as we can burn down. But we can never die. It's time we took back what is ours, and rebel against the darkest monstrosity that plagues us all. You can either die along with the castle, or you can live as if it was never buried.
Silence fills the air, and before all hope seemed to fade, more and more Vegalians would stand up. Proudly, boldly, one by one would rise from the corpse of their garden, reborn, resurrected, and reunited. A loud cheer fills the air. Vegala was no longer bound by a shrine. Vegala was the castle that could never die. With the revolt of Vegalian people against Almighties, the deities turned to see their people become an army, and more so, an enemy. They were all mocked as traitors, disposable and rebuildable. It's not like they haven't built before, so they can build again. Their lives are supposedly immortal. But this did not stop the tenacity of the Vegalian people, as one foul swoop from their forces took full charge into their rulers, causing a war of paramount size. People willing to sacrifice their own kind for battle, for revolution, for a brand new resurrection. Each colony, Crimson, Velveta, Trojan Magnus, Philippices, to name a few, did not speak as much volume as the battlefield that beheld. The deities were cornered, distracted enough for Tyrant and Fate to make their most daring mission of all come to life. They stormed towards the castle doors and make their way through as they locked tightly. There was but one thing Tyrant had not bargained on, however. It was one debacle being capable of entering the Iris's tomb. It was another to retrieve it. They had no resource and no means to conquer their mission. That is until Lady Fate reveals yet another deceptive and masterful contingency she concocted. Underneath her veil, she uncovers the sacred Vegalian Bible, one thought to have been burned along with the castle. She fell back in her groups not by mere accident, but to signal Tyrant. It so happens that Lady Fate knew the deities were planning to use her all along, and after overhearing their discussions of capturing Tyrant and using the castle as their pawn in their plans, she had been caught red-handed. Instead of punishing her on the spot, they used her to take down Tyrant, who they believed could still not be trusted, and the castle all in one. And so she had retrieved the Bible all for herself long ago, by manipulating the guards with her bestowed new privilege given by the mad emperors to protect it from sight. What this meant was to be seen in due course, but they had to hurry. The deities were outnumbered by Vegala Infinity's citizens. They would try to devour. They would try to empower. But in the end, this only made the army against them stronger than they'd ever known. After tremendous amounts of strength and perseverance, rigorous trials and many sacrifices, they had finally entered the tomb of the Iris. It felt rather underwhelming to see it in all of its whimsy and foretelling. It was but a mere golden rock, floating in a coated protection concocted by several layerings of Velveta veiling. Of course, this explains the deity's choosing. They did not admire Fate for who she was, but more for what she possessed. Shimmering gloriously, though, it was a majesty to behold. Lady Fate uncovers the Bible. This book could only be understood by Vegalians, a language not decipherable by other mortals, wrapped through the Vegala galaxy. She grasps Tyrant's hand, asking him to join her. As they read along, tears would be shed. For what they discovered would be the most impacting revelation of a lifetime.
Thy unholiest became to be. Sacred sanctity we must retrieve. Amongst the cradle of Primus we desire. Through plummeting darkness we crave fire. We ask for destiny to whisk away grace, to retreat from the sins it once faced. Bring with it protection, let it soar like thunder, through eternal darkness, left to slumber. Wash away the blood caused by those who hungered, and guide us on this journey through eternity's plunder. Hither and yonder, be ready for wonder.
Tears drop from their eyes and land on the pages. Suddenly, the book emits a bright glow, and as it appears, so does the Iris. It thaws away piece by piece until it retains a brand new shape. Could it be that the Iris has finally taken form? Another secret kept from Vegala, now revealed to the ones who sought for the truth they desired. Tyrant and Fate stare at each other before holding the book together. They nod, and the Bible is slammed shut. This summons a wave of energy through the room, and the iris is now free. While no longer immobile, scorches shroud the archival of knowledge, becoming madder by the second until powerful enough to jump light speed outside of the castle walls and into the darkest corners of space. But all was not to be a happy ending. Vegala Infinity's ground begun to shake, crumble, now becoming unstable, with the revelation of the iris being the very thing containing Vegala's grasp within the realm of Hitherfall, and once leaving the proximity of the Cradle Primus, it would cause calamity and destruction on Infinity. Nothing could stop what was once known as Cradle Primus from destabilizing, as it transforms into a seismic boulder of darkness and chaotic ripples. It is no longer alive, as it becomes a dark vortex, swallowing all in the vicinity of Vegala Infinity. The walls started to cave in, grounds being sucked into a central black hole. Tyrant and Fate made a strong leap of faith and retreated before the jaws of Vegala's gates could shut completely. Their home was no more. It had been sent to the realm on the other side, Yondrathal. There was no turning back now, and the two would soar through the vapidness of nothing in hot pursuit of the iris. The heart of an artist was from the sacred Bible that bound people together, forged and driven by communities. This was to be the end of Vegala's story as we know it. The heart was the iris, and the artists were those capable of beholding its power, unlocking its true potential. One day, revealing the truth kept from so many lives. Art never truly ends. It is we who decide when it ends. For Tyrant and Fate, they had destined this capsule of wisdom to be shared forever. Or, at least that's what the artist wanted you to believe. When one story ends, so does another unfold. Goliath is released from the grasp of Tyrant's hands and consciously returns to the depths. What felt like mere seconds in the depths felt like an entire lifespan for most others. He had unearthed knowledge, feelings, the numbing and scarring hums of warfare, despair, and anarchy. Goliath was indeed convinced from this point on to remain by the encrypt, weakening his fist, hunching his head. What came of the visions was to paralyze him in more ways one could imagine. He sits down by the encrypt's fortitude and slumps into a state of disassociation and disbelief. This was not his pain to bear, but was cast onto him by a perspective from his own father. Tyrant is glad he finally understands, and after wishing him a fond farewell until they meet again for great battles, he leaves for the Purgaprime Castle. Goliath was to be left alone for many a century, until he is summoned to fight and protect again. An anomaly of parasitic brutality to others, was just a mere being like everyone else who was cast out solely for the power he wielded. It is a punishment that feels unjust, and many a day was spent questioning why he remains, until the thoughts came back to haunt him. A fatal gaslight that would force Goliath to believe something that wasn't entirely telling the whole truth. The artist who beheld the sacred archival of knowledge would suffer the same greeds its creators contained. A time will come of Goliath to understand this one day. The truth would always prevail without words. Such is the day he finally ascended from the iris.
My boy, how I wish your fate hadn't come to pass. It still pains me deep to think about what had to be done. Born unholiest, living to protect, to die by duty. He cannot know he is guarding his own surrogate hive mind beast. But if he was to know that much, it may break him. He may very well tear down the walls that protect not only him, but the world he steps upon, against the Motho Hive's sworn legacy to engulf our planet whole. Was it cruel? Perhaps. But was it crueler for him to know? Maybe selfish. It is why I entrust you the Iris Archival. Lock this secret to your grave. Dare he find out, and he could become uncontrollable. I love my son, more than anything, but I want him pure. I can't bear to imagine what fate Goliath would suffer if merging with the beast. I fear the Motho Hive will manifest its darkest clutches and convert him. He can already thwart the damned off of his own back. I couldn't bear to see my boy engulf planets, too. It does, however, feel ironic. I fought against the cover-ups of truth, hidden by our sacred deities. And now, all I'm doing is hiding more truth. But if this truth was to become realized, it would spell the end for many of us. And we simply can't turn back now. My boy. Oh, how I wish your fate had come to pass.